Hi, everybody. It's another Lizard Lab production. It's this week's Herp of the Week, presented by Steph Deering. She hasn't told us what it is, although I think there's quite a big clue on the screen. Over to you, Steph.
All right. So I was thinking about Herp of the Week, and naturally I was going to pick a frog species, but I felt some groups haven't really come to light in Herp of the Week. So as you probably would have guessed, we're talking about a turtle species today. And I would like to introduce this week's Herp of the Week, the pig-nosed turtle, or Carretochelys insculpta. Most commonly known as the pig-nosed turtle, but it does have some other common names. The fly river turtle is another big one, which is where it was initially discovered. And all these other names, it seems to have a lot in the literature, but most commonly the pig-nosed turtle. So it is one of our own. They have a pretty restricted range, so they're only found in sort of this small portion of the Northern Territory, and then the sort of southern lowlands of Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. In the Northern Territory, they're known to occur in about 5 of the river systems, but potentially more than that. In Papua, the boundaries aren't sort of as clear, but they seem to occur in all the major southern flowing river systems. Although their range is quite sort of distinct, they have pretty different habitats within those ranges. So in Papua New Guinea, they're often found in sort of swamps and rivers, lagoons, whereas in Australia, they're found more in like continuous flowing waters and that are usually seasonally clear. So this is sort of the habitat that they're found in Australia. This is in the Daly River in the Northern Territory. And this is sort of a typical habitat for them in Papua New Guinea. So one of the really cool things about them is that they're the only remaining member of their family, Carretochelys. They were originally described from the fly river species, and it was an incomplete specimen. So they were originally put into the class Pleurodira, which is the side neck turtles. Then they found a complete specimen, and then they were put into Cryptodira. But now they're sort of known just as their own. So this genus is considered monotypic and has no other subspecies. There was a bit of debate about this. There's a paper by Wells in 2002, and he argued that the Australian and Papua New Guinea subspecies should be their own, but doesn't really seem to be sort of accepted or acknowledged at this point. That I know of, but I'm not an expert, so I don't know if I should make those claims. But yeah, pretty cool. They're considered monotypic with no subspecies. Another amazing thing about these guys, which I'm sure you would have noticed, is that they have this large fleshy proboscis. Their nostrils open up at the end of this, and the cool thing is that the angle of the snout and the tissues and muscles allow them to sit under a substrate, and they can clear the water without having to go completely above it with their head. So I'll give you a little kind of idea of what I mean by this. It's just a little short clip of a video. Sorry. If it wants to play. Yeah, so you can see before he puts his head up that he can actually push the snout out of the water and clear the water, which is pretty cool. There was also sort of some papers that I came across with this, and they sort of spoke about the possibility that the erectile tissues could actually open and close underwater to stop water coming into the trachea if they were underwater for a long period of time, which is a technique that Caretta sea turtles use, but it wasn't something that they kind of confirmed or denied, but that was another possibility, which is kind of cool. A bit of a sad note though, they are under some pretty intense threats, particularly by the illegal wildlife trade in Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. They're exploited for the pet industry, but dominantly for their meat. So they did an up-to-date review of the seizures of illegally traded animals, and they were pretty big. So from 2003 to 2012, they reported seizures of 80,000 individuals, and it was slightly lower, but still a lot, between 2013 and 2020 of 52,000 individuals, which is pretty sad. And yeah, it's not limited to just the adults. So the eggs are also sought out to be incubated, and then sold for the pet trade. There wasn't any sort of up-to-date numbers on this, but about 2 million eggs annually was sort of estimated to be collected in the 90s. So pretty sad. In Australia, the threats are sort of more focused around habitat degradation, but also predators like goannas, panoptes, things like that, raid the eggs in the nest as well. And yeah, in 2016, it was estimated that 50% of the population decline in Papua New Guinea was due to human harvesting. Yeah, so there is sort of some conservation efforts around them. In Australia, they're pretty protected, and Kakadu National Park is sort of thought to have some pretty significant populations. And although export is controlled in Papua New Guinea, I think it's pretty hard to sort of locally regulate that in those areas. There is a project called the Piku Project, which aims to get kind of community involvement and get them on board with the turtles as opposed to thinking of them as meat, I guess. But ironically, it's run by University of Canberra, so interesting. But yeah, and that is all I have.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Steph. Have we got any questions, comments?
I don't know how well I can answer, but
I've got a question. I'm puzzled by the idea that 2 million eggs a year are taken for the pet trade, because I can't believe that the market for pet pig-nosed turtles is more than a few hundred turtles a year, or maybe 1,000, but I can't imagine there are 2 million human beings that want to have a pet pig-nosed turtle. That just seems to be an amazing number relative to the potential demand.
There are already a lot of pig-nosed turtles in the captive trade, right? I remember seeing them in the US ages ago.
Yeah, I mean, those numbers were from the 90s as well, so I don't know sort of today what the numbers are like, but yeah, I mean, I was pretty amazed, but I don't know, I guess, the reasoning behind it. And
I mean, I think one of the messages that's come out of Dan Natush's work in Indonesia with the snakes and so forth is that the meat trade is essentially unlimited and can be just horrific, and it is obviously for turtles and a lot of other animals. But the pet trade, by definition, is very self-limiting. There's really not that many people that want wild-caught pet animals, and the numbers involved tend to be a tiny fraction of the numbers that are taken for human consumption. So I'm just puzzled that anyone would go to the trouble to get millions of baby turtles.
Yeah, I mean, also, I guess I don't know how many of those turtles are, surviving to become a hatchling.
Well, yeah, I mean, they also do play the numbers game where they send thousands over to the US with the hope that 200 of them will be usable.
People also might keep more than one.
But yeah, a million is a lot.
Yeah, I just wonder if there's a market for eating baby turtles in some parts of Asia that has a more plausible reason for people to get millions upon millions of baby turtles. But I don't know. I don't know anything about it.
Does anybody know how genetically different the PNG populations are from the Northern Australian ones? Do you know, Simon?
There's a PhD student doing that now.
With Arthur or?
With Arthur, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was out in the field actually helping get some samples from Kakori, but they're going across the Fly River and other places to do it.
Yeah.
They grow a lot bigger up in New Guinea. You get a couple of the girls up to 20 kilos. Wow. There's some of those big ones are pretty hard to wrestle with the surface, actually.
Yeah. Were you able to dominate a female pig-nosed turtle on your field trip, Simon?
Just, you know, with one hand.
Okay. Thanks very much, Steph.